So our next speaker is Lilian Weber, who's a postdoc with Prof. Klein Pfluger in the Department of Psychiatry and here in Oxford, and she's a psychologist and physicist by training. So she's going to talk to us about the influence of ketamine on the effect of expectations on perceptual and emotional learning. Just a short talk. Okay, you're set there.
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's the top button.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Great. Thank you. Welcome to my talk, and thanks so much for having me. It's a great pleasure. So what really fascinates me about ketamine is that on the one hand, we use it as this pharmacological model of psychosis due to its acute effects on perception. But then on the other hand, of course, we use it as a rapid antidepressant. Are these two effects completely independent, or are they maybe linked on some level of mechanism? The fact that we still cannot answer this question, to me, reflects a more general explanatory gap or disconnect that we face in psychiatry between different levels of explanation. On the one hand, the cognitive behavior level on which we describe symptoms, and then on the other hand, the synaptic level at which we describe the actions of drugs. So to better link these levels, what I do is I look at neurocognitive mechanisms or computations that on the one hand drive behavior and on the other hand might be implemented by neurobiology. On this level of cognitive computations, we have some evidence indicating that we can understand the effects of ketamine on perception as a weakening of the impact of expectations on perception. So we know that perception is a product of both new sensory information but also prior knowledge, and ketamine might simply shift the balance between the two. Ketamine's effects on mood are far less well understood on this level. However, their really fast onset suggests that the drug can somehow directly change how positive and negative experiences are integrated to produce mood states. And potentially it does so also by weakening the effect of existing pessimistic expectations on this integration process. So how do we quantify this weight between, this balance between expectations and new information? Here I'm plotting what we call integration kernels. These kernels specify the weight that we place on past versus current information when making a decision. And the shape of these kernels reflects exactly the balance I was talking about. If they're very steep, it means we really only consider the most recent evidence. If they're more shallow, like this blue line, it means we also take into account previous knowledge or past observations. This, again, should depend on what we think about how things are changing in the world. If we think the world is stable but noisy, we will want to take into account previous knowledge and new information. If we think the world is changing very fast or volatile, then we really want to focus on the most recent information. So the key hypothesis is then that ketamine changes or interferes with the way that past observations or expectations are integrated with new information, and that this mechanism across different domains of information processing, from perceptual to affective information processing, produces both its effects on perception and on mood. So that's the hypothesis we're testing in our current study, the PEDEX study, where we experimentally induce expectations, and then we measure the integration kernels that people are using to make decisions, as well as the neural responses in EEG. And we do that across different domains, from perceptual processing to affective processing. Here's an overview of our study protocol. After an initial screening, people come in for 2 infusion visits, and the order in which they receive placebo or ketamine infusion is counterbalanced. Every infusion visit actually consists of multiple days. Starting 3 days before the first infusion, they practice our tasks at home online, and this is where we induce expectations. On the day itself, they come for a long visit, 6 to 7 hours, where they play tasks, get the infusion, and we measure EEG. This allows us to determine the effects of ketamine on their decision behavior as well as their EEG signals. And critically, they play our tasks both during the infusion, but also 2 hours later. So we can get both at the acute effects of ketamine and the delayed. And a day after the infusion, they again play some of our tasks at home. So we can also get a snapshot of this time point at which the antidepressant effects usually peak. And then the second infusion visits looks exactly the same. Okay, so this is an ongoing study, and we're aiming for an N of 30. This is all in healthy participants so far. And I'm going to show you now 3 examples of the task that we're using and some data from our first 12 participants, but I'm still blind, so it's only main effects for now. Oh, a quick note on our infusion protocol. This has 3 stages, an initial bolus, a stabilization stage, and then this long 60 minutes low infusion rate stage where people play our task. So the aim of this protocol is to achieve a relatively stable plasma level during these 60 minutes of task execution. And the overall dose is 0.7 milligram per kilogram. Some people get very nauseous and cannot play our task, but it's rare. And if we look at the ratings, then most of the participants find it rather pleasing. Okay, so maybe I'll only show you 2 tasks. So the first task I'll show you is a version of our perceptual choice task. People play this during these 60 minutes of the infusion. And so this is really aimed at capturing the perceptual shift that underlies ketamine's acute effects. So this is how the task looked like. People are navigating this white shield to catch as many of these radioactive beams that are shooting from the center as possible in order to save the world. Okay, so that's the task. For every movement decision, they need to integrate over the different beam positions that they've observed in the recent past. And over different conditions, we're varying whether these beam positions change fast or slow and whether they're noisy or not. And this is how the integration kernels look like in our first 12 participants. And you can see that when things are stable or noisy, so these are the dark blue and the yellow lines, people place significantly more weight on past information and less weight on current information compared to the other conditions, exactly as we would hope. And here's the same idea in the emotional domain. Again, people play this task on the infusion visit, but 2 hours after the infusion, so when we would expect affective changes to happen. So in this task, they rate dynamically changing levels of valence and arousal in a sequence of emotional face images. This task allows us to get at their emotional biases, but also critically to measure emotional integration kernels, as you can see plotted here, both for valence and arousal. And again, the shape of these kernels depends on how quickly things are changing and how noisy they are. And then a final task that I will go through very quickly is a reward-based task that people play before and after the infusion. They play a little fish that swims through the ocean and collects rewards. But it's not really important what they do. Important is that they do this in 2 different contexts, one that is very frustrating and one that is rewarding and fun to play. And so at test, 24 hours after the infusion, they play this task again, but now in a neutral context. But we can see that their behavior is still influenced by these affective memories from the training elicited by the different background colors. And obviously, this is trying to translate the great work of Emma Robinson in rodents to humans. So based on what she's found, we would expect that ketamine weakens the impact of these affective memories on people's behavior. Cool. So that was a very quick overview of some of the things we're doing to better understand the neurocognitive mechanisms that drive ketamine's effects on perception and on mood, hopefully gaining some insight on whether there might be a common mechanism to the 2. And with that, I'd like to thank you. Thank all of the brilliant team and my funders.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Lilian. We've got time for questions.
Thank you so much for this talk. I think it's incredibly important work, especially as we think about how ketamine and these drugs...
Can you speak up just a bit? Sorry, the microphone's not working.
Sure. I think this is really important as we think about how these drugs will be used with psychotherapy, as we think about the sort of context that the drugs are administered in and some of the sensitivity to change in those environments. I'm wondering if you're familiar with Hugo Bottomann's work from Paris. He also looked at the effect of ketamine on belief updating and noticed that there was greater optimistic bias after ketamine infusion. And I'm wondering if you feel, the extent to which you feel like these contexts may affect some of the results of therapy.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly the kind of thing we're looking at. And I was very intrigued by yesterday afternoon, where we're thinking about whether, maybe there is a state-dependent effect of ketamine, and it depends on kind of what system you engage, both during the infusion but also afterwards, the kind of psychological effects you might get. So what we're trying to do in this work is quantify all of this. So that's why we're starting in healthy participants and inducing the expectations experimentally, because obviously we don't have a good handle on the existing expectations or beliefs of people that come in, depressed people. So first of all, we need to show this kind of on a basic science level where we have control over everything and we can quantify the effect and compare the infusions.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. I'm afraid I think we're going to have to leave it at that point, just to move on. But thank you very much
thanks.
indeed, Lilian.